Our next speaker, some of you have seen him on 60 Minutes, inventor, scientist, cancer researcher, recipient of the Gordon Moore Award, all this at 16 years old, Jack Andraka.
The $75,000 2012 Gordon E. Moore Award in the category of medicine and
Maybe if we'd caught it earlier. That's what the doctor said about my uncle's pancreatic cancer. Like that was even possible with the testing they had. But what did I know? I was too young to understand things like cancer, or how to test for it. Too young to be taken seriously. 199 experts told me I was too young, that they didn't have time for my little science fair project. But the way I saw it, if the key was early detection, maybe someone just needed to start looking earlier. Like during 5th period freshman biology.
Never seem to exactly escape that video of me freaking out. It seems to follow me everywhere. It makes it really hard to give a serious talk after me freaking out. I should have reenacted that coming up on stage. It would have made things a bit more exciting. However, my journey began when I was 13. A close family friend who was like an uncle to me actually passed away from pancreatic cancer. And when the disease hit so close to home, I knew I needed to learn more. So I went online to find answers. And using the internet, I found a variety of statistics on pancreatic cancer. And what I had found really shocked me. You see, over 85% of all pancreatic cancers are diagnosed late, when someone has less than a 2% chance of survival. Why are we so bad at detecting pancreatic cancer? The reason? Our current modern medicine is a 60-year-old technique. That's older than my dad. But also, it costs $800 per test and is grossly inaccurate, missing 30% of all pancreatic cancers. Your doctor would have to be ridiculously suspicious that you have the cancer in order to give you this test. Learning this, I was sure there had to be a better way. So armed with 9th grade biology, I set out to change the face of cancer diagnostics. Bit of a lofty goal, however, achievable, right? And so then I went back online and I found what a sensor for pancreatic cancer would really have to look like in order to be effective. Sensor would have to be inexpensive, rapid, simple, sensitive, selective, and minimally invasive. And I was pretty sure I could do this, however, I wasn't quite sure how. So I went back online, and then what I found is how we're currently diagnosing cancer. We're looking at your bloodstream, particularly for these changes in levels of different proteins. And while this sounds really straightforward, it's anything but. You see, you have these liters and liters of protein, or blood, that's already abundant in protein, and essentially looking at this minuscule difference in this tiny amount of protein. So it's next to impossible. It's like trying to find a needle in a stack of nearly identical needles. However, undeterred to my teenage optimism, or how some people label it, complete ignorance of the entire field, I went to any teenager's best sources for information, Google and Wikipedia, how I get through every high school test and quiz. And essentially I found a database of over 8,000 different proteins that are found in your bloodstream when you have these different cancers. And so it was summer break, so I decided, well, I have nothing else to do, so I locked myself tightly in my room, began bashing out all these literature searches. And at the end of summer, when I was close to losing my sanity, I mean, you can only look at so many proteins before you lose it, and I was really doubting my potential for any future social interaction. I mean, really, who locks himself in their room and looks up tons of proteins for 3 months. So it made for some really interesting back-to-school essays like, oh, what did you do this summer? Johnny says, oh, I went to Yellowstone on vacation. Jack, what did you do? I researched proteins. Sounds fun, right? And so finally, on the 4,000th try, I finally found one protein called mesothelium. And it's just an ordinary run-of-the-mill type protein, unless, of course, you have pancreatic, ovarian, and lung cancer, in which case it's found these very high levels in your bloodstream. But also, the key is that it's found in the very earliest stages of the disease, when someone has close to 100% chance of survival. So now that I'd found a protein that could reliably signify the presence of cancer, I then shifted my focus to actually detecting that protein and thus the presence of the cancer. And I kind of had this epiphany moment on this big, epic journey. And this epiphany moment happened in the most unlikely of places. High school biology class, the most stifler of innovation. I mean, especially with my biology teacher, I hated her. I had some griefs with her, and I still do. I haven't talked to her since. And essentially, what happened one day is I was kind of fed up with her, and it escalated to the point where I was blatantly just ignoring instruction completely, snuck in an article on what are called carbon nanotubes, long thin pipes of carbon that are an atom thick and 1/50,000th the diameter of your hair. So they're extremely small, but they have these incredible properties. They're kind of like the superheroes of material science. So I was reading about all these properties, and I felt pretty suave reading it sneakily under my desk like a comic book, except science. And then I was kind of on one ear, I was listening to antibodies. My teacher was teaching us about these cool molecules that only react with one specific protein. In this case, a cancer biomarker. So it's kind of like a lock and key. And then all of a sudden, I was just kind of being droned to sleep by my teacher. And all of a sudden, it hit me. Essentially, you could combine these two principles. You take a network of nanotubes, take some antibodies, weave it into this network, and then you have a network that only reacts with one specific protein. But also, the coolest thing is due to the properties of these nanotubes, it will actually change the electrical properties, how electricity flows through this network, based on how much protein is present, and thus detect pancreatic cancer. Just as I had this kind of aha moment, I was kind of feeling all giddy inside. And then all of a sudden, my biology teacher, I swear she has eyes on the back of her head, she swirls around, storms up to me, takes that article, says, "What is this actual science doing in my class?" At least that's what I pretty much assumed she was saying. In fact, I got a 30-minute lecture on self-respect and respecting others and myself. It was very boring. However, at the end, I finally got my article back, and then I all of a sudden hit a catch. So these networks of nanotubes, they're really flimsy. But since they're so delicate, they need to be supported. So I chose to use paper. And making a paper sensor for pancreatic cancer is about as simple as making chocolate chip cookies, which I love. I mean, if I get to be on a test, there goes the chocolate chip cookies, plus a bit of ice cream. And essentially what you do is you take some water, you add some antibodies, add some nanotubes, mix it up, take some paper, dip it, dry it, and then you can detect cancer. And just as soon as I had come up with this, I all of a sudden hit another snag. You see, my mom was going to really support cancer research on the kitchen countertop. There was no Andraka cancer program in the budget. I mean, we had done some pretty crazy stuff, me and my brother. We had this big vat of uranium in our basement, next to the dynamite's worth amount of nitroglycerin. And I even cultured E. coli on my kitchen countertop, and thus we're on the FBI's watch list. Well, my mom is, since we used her credit card. I mean, her book search is insane on Amazon. It's math books, and then how to make a rocketry program at home, and then her romance novels, How to Court the Duke. So I think the Amazon people think we're a bit schizophrenic or something. However, I realized I would need a lab, so I sent out emails to 200 professors at Johns Hopkins University National Institutes of Health saying, "Can you please get into your lab?" And attached to it was this nice 32-page behemoth of a document outlining my procedure, data, all of that stuff, the whole 9 yards. And essentially, I emailed it out, and I'm going to get so many positive emails. I get to pick and choose my lab. I'm going to be hailed as boy genius on Time cover. And then my lofty dreams hit a wall. See, I got 199 rejections, and I realized professors aren't nearly as nice as they look in those profile pictures. they're all smiling, and they're like, oh, we'll definitely accept you. And then really they should be like frowny face with a sign, we hate kids, leave us alone. However, eventually one professor, Dr. Andraka from Johns Hopkins University, finally said, okay, come in for an interview. 3 months later, walk in, super proud. I had just come from school, and so I was in my sweatpants and a t-shirt, not the best interview wear. However, I went in pretty confident. I'm like, this is going to be an easy interview, like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite class? Easy stuff, right? Classic interview. No, it was like an interrogation in there. They firing questions, and he decided, let's try and set the Guinness World Book of Records for how many PhDs we can cram into a room. 28 of them, apparently. And at the end of this 1-hour interrogation, I finally got the lab space I needed. And after 7 months of screwing every single procedure up, I sneezed in my culture cells, I blew them up in the centrifuge. It was bad. He was like, why did I accept this kid into my lab? What was I on? However, eventually I ended up with one small paper sensor. It costs 3 cents, takes 5 minutes to run. This makes it 168 times faster, over 26,000 times less expensive, and over 400 times more sensitive than our current methods of detection. But also, the coolest thing is that this sensor can detect the cancers in the earliest stage, when something that's close to 100% chance of survival. So far, it has over 90% accuracy. So in the next 2 to 5 years, this patent-pending sensor could potentially lift the once dismal pancreatic cancer survival rates from 5.5% close to 100%. And it would do similar for ovarian. And it would do similar for ovarian and lung cancer. But by simply shifting out that antibody, you could detect an entirely different disease, ranging from Alzheimer's, other forms of cancer, even HIV, AIDS, and heart disease. The applications are limitless. Now, throughout this journey, I faced a lot of adversity, right? I mean, told by 199 professors, they told me no. My biology teacher, no. Even my own parents told me, this is a bit shifty for a high school biology class, maybe a bit down from there. And at least they didn't tell me to make a papier-mâché volcano. However, probably the greatest adversity I faced were paywalls. You see, 90% of all scientific journals are locked tightly behind these paywalls. That means when you want to read it, you have to cough up $35. That's $3 per page. That's who would pay for that? Well, me, apparently. And because of this inhibitive cost, I couldn't get access to a lot of the scientific journals that I needed. So like any self-respecting teen, I decided to pirate them. But that didn't work out too well. I mean, only a few of them I could find. And I'd email professors asking, can I see a copy of your journal? And then they'd say, well, I don't own the copyright to it anymore, so I'd get sued for a crap ton of cash by the journals if I gave that to you, so too bad for you. Then finally I'd cave in, save up that $35 and spend it, and I'd realize this journal has absolutely nothing to do with my research whatsoever. And I'd promptly toss into the recycling bin, much to the woe of my parents who had spent that $35. And nowadays you see all these big STEM initiatives, we need to get more kids interested in science. But when the Katy Perry single costs 99 cents and a seminal science paper costs $35, there's a bit of a mixed message there, right? Because the world of science should be just as accessible as the world of pop culture and music, and if we don't do that, then we simply won't have a next generation of scientists. But this isn't a problem for teenagers like me. This is a problem for everyone. You see, recently, Harvard University released this statement, saying major periodical subscriptions, especially to electronic journals published by historically key providers, could not be sustained. Continuing these subscriptions on the current financial footing is untenable. Now, what does it say about the world of academic publishing, accessibility of knowledge, and the flow of information when Harvard University, one of the richest academic institutions in the world, can't afford to pay for its research articles anymore? By using these paywalls, we've instituted a really rigorous class system, pretty much. We have the knowledge elite, who are essentially those professors who work at those high-end institutions and also work at corporate labs or federal labs and can afford these articles. But then there's a bit of discrimination there. I mean, Harvard University has quite a lot more money to shell out than Towson University. So it's essentially saying to some high schools, well, you guys can teach up to calculus. all of you other guys, you have to stay down at Algebra 1. And it's the same thing for countries. I mean, I was in Ukraine recently, and they said, we just can't afford these articles. They're too expensive. And then there are people like me and you, knowledge middle class people. People, we have access to the internet. We can occasionally afford an article. We might be able to see the abstracts, get background information. But then there's the knowledge underclass, those that have no access to the internet whatsoever. And that's 5 billion people, 80% of our population. So essentially, we're living in a knowledge aristocracy. We're 0.008% of the world. Those are the only people who can access these articles. That's like taking New York City, take 80 people off the street, those are the only people that can read these scientific articles, whilst we let the other 80% live in knowledge poverty. But imagine if instead we could live in a knowledge democracy, where regardless if you're from Mexico to Malaysia, from the US to China, it wouldn't matter if you're a billionaire living on less than $1 a day, you would have the exact same access to these research articles. Because science should not be a luxury, and knowledge should not be a commodity. It should be a basic human right. Because knowledge is one of the great equalizers of the world. It doesn't discriminate on you. If you have that knowledge, it doesn't matter how much money you have or where you work. It just matters that you have that knowledge. Because the minds of the people have to be free. That means the minds of everyone, not the minds of the select few that can afford these articles. Science must be agnostic to how much money you have or where you work. Because this tier-based approach to the dissemination of scientific knowledge is not very effective, and it's just not fair. Because a girl in Pakistan should have just the exact same access to articles as a preeminent Nobel laureate at Harvard University, not because that's sound economics, but because that is morally correct and that is equality. And I believe, and we really have to strive for such a society, because if we don't, we not only betray ourselves, we betray our children and all future generations. Because from womb to tomb, we're connected to others. We're connected to the others from the past, present, and future. Our decisions today will impact how people make decisions tomorrow. And so my message to you is that really we should strive for this equality, because our values as a society, they aren't determined by nature or by some nature's God. They're determined by the arbitrary values of our wills. Our willpower is what determines our values. So making these articles access-free, making these articles freely available should be our primary objective right now, because that is how we're going to solve the world's problems. Because the person who might solve global warming or like cancer, they might not have access to any of these articles. And we have to dare to be the change that we seek. And we must have the audacity to spread that change around the world. And I believe that we can do this, because by educating the world's population, breaking down these paywalls, and letting everyone have access to the internet, we'll see the emergence of the society where everyone's equal. And we can do this because if a 15-year-old who didn't know what a pancreas was could find a new way to detect pancreatic cancer, just imagine what we could all do together. Thank you.
Stay here, Jack. All right. Well, I speak for everyone here when I say thank you for what you're doing. And what I want to know is what's next for you?
So currently I'm working on the Tricorder X Prize for $10 million, sponsored by the Qualcomm Foundation. And it's developed something the size of a smartphone that you pass over your skin and can diagnose any disease instantly.
And how's that going?
That's actually going pretty well. I have 4 other team members from all over the world, and we're going up against 300 teams of all adults.
Great.
So pretty cool.
Yeah, we wish you the best of luck, Jack. All right. Thank you, Jack.